Welcome to LV Scary Stories, where we explore the eeriest encounters from people who work closest to death. Morticians, those who care for the departed, have a unique bond with the deceased, handling bodies, comforting grieving families, and occasionally experiencing things that defy explanation. They live a life few can imagine. In today's episode, we'll delve into 5 chilling tales told by funeral directors and morticians. These are stories where the dead seem to linger, sending messages from beyond or creating unsettling moments that haunt the living. Story 1: The Dispatcher's Call. I'm a funeral director in Los Angeles, a city with a diverse population and a multitude of traditions. Our funeral home does its best to honor each culture, and as the newest employee when I started, I often worked the night shift. It's an unpredictable business. Some evenings, we'd stay open until 10 or 11 p.m. for family viewings. Our facility is large, adjacent to a sprawling cemetery, and typically staffed by 2 people overnight for safety reasons. One night it was just me and Josh. Josh was embalming the body of a 62-year-old woman, a former 911 dispatcher who had succumbed to heart disease. Her profession, known for its high stress, had likely contributed to her condition. Before finishing, Josh told me he was heading to Taco Bell before it closed. I stayed behind, tidying up. About 10 minutes after Josh left, the phone rang. We had 2 phones, one at the main desk and another in the prep room where the body was. Expecting a call from a nursing home about a pickup, I walked toward the main desk. But just as I reached for the phone, the ringing stopped. I froze. Someone had answered it. Thinking Josh hadn't left yet, I paused. Then, clear as day, I heard a woman's voice. "Hello, how may I help you?" That wasn't Josh. Chills ran down my spine. I headed to the prep room. The woman's body lay undisturbed on the table. The phone on the wall nearby hung in its cradle. Suddenly, the main phone rang again. I answered it. This time it was the nursing home. After giving me details about the body for pickup, the nurse mentioned something odd. She said, "The first time I called, a woman answered, but it went silent, so I had to hang up and call again." I didn't tell her what I'd just experienced. In this line of work, you get used to strange occurrences, though you rarely discuss them. When Josh returned, I told him what happened. He laughed nervously, but didn't seem surprised. Later, I picked up the body from the nursing home and brought it back to the morgue, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something had been trying to communicate. Story 2: The Fog and the Body Bag. One foggy night around 4 a.m., I got a call from a nurse requesting a body pickup at a nearby nursing home. I'd been there many times before and knew some of the staff. When I arrived, the patient, an 87-year-old woman, was lying in bed. The staff had prepared her body by securing her jaw and limbs. After placing her in a white body bag, I gently lifted her onto my gurney and took her to the van. Driving back to the funeral home, the early morning fog blanketed the cemetery near our facility. Suddenly, the van began to sputter as if it were about to lose power. Concerned, I pulled over to the side of the road. As I stopped, I noticed something strange. The body bag in the back of the van was moving. The silhouette of the woman's body slowly sat upright. My heart raced. I climbed into the back of the van, unzipped the bag, and found her sitting up, her eyes wide open. I checked her pulse and shined a light into her eyes. Nothing. Her skin was cold and pale. She was still very much deceased. Softly, I whispered, "We're almost there. Let me help you lie back down." I zipped the bag and gently laid her back down. Arriving at the funeral home, I placed her in the cold storage room. I've seen a lot in my career, but something about that moment, her sitting up in the foggy darkness, stayed with me. Story 3: Larry's Last Goodbye. Few things are as heartbreaking as a child's funeral. One of the hardest cases I ever handled was a young boy, Larry, who was hit by a car while riding his scooter. The driver, an unlicensed immigrant trying to support his family, was arrested. But no amount of justice could ease Larry's parents' grief. When his parents came to see him, I had to warn them. The heat of summer had taken a toll on Larry's body, despite our best efforts to preserve him. His face was visible through the body bag, but his limbs were too damaged to show. His mother's cries were heart-wrenching. His father, though silent, lifted Larry's body in the bag and held him close. I had to step out. The sorrow was overwhelming. Later, night staff began reporting strange occurrences. Around 4 a.m., they'd hear a child's voice calling mommy, daddy, and soft cries echoing through the halls. One night, I heard it too. My coworker Mike suggested calling Larry's father. When his father arrived, he gently said, "Daddy's here, Larry. Come on, let's go home." He waited by his car, opened the back door as if letting Larry in, and drove away. After that, the cries stopped. At Larry's funeral, he looked peaceful, almost as if he were smiling. It was one of the few times I cried in this line of work. Story 4: Gang Violence and Ghostly Whispers. In Los Angeles, gang violence is a tragic reality. Many of the bodies we handle are victims of shootings. One evening, we received the body of a gang member who'd been killed in a drive-by. His injuries were severe, but his face remained intact, which made the embalming process smoother. While preparing his body late at night, I heard faint whispers coming from the storage room. The words were unintelligible, but they were clear enough to make me pause. Thinking it was a coworker, I called out, but no one answered. The whispers stopped as suddenly as they had started. The next morning, I mentioned it to a colleague. They shrugged and said, "Happens sometimes. In my line of work as a mortician, we strive to make the deceased look as presentable as possible. But there are cases, car accidents, suicides from high places, or drowning victims where the damage is so extreme that even the most skilled hands can't restore them. In these situations, we often recommend a closed casket funeral, and most families understand." One day, a body was brought to us following a drive-by shooting. The victim was a Latino man named Carlos. He had been shot twice in the chest while standing outside his home, smoking a cigarette after a heated argument with his mother. Hours later, his family called, requesting to see him, especially his brothers and friends. Before they arrived, I did what I could. I patched the wounds with cotton and sutures, making Carlos look as peaceful as possible, and placed him in the cold room. When the family entered, I stepped out to give them privacy. His mother was kneeling on the floor, sobbing, seemingly oblivious to how dirty the floor actually was, despite its polished shine. His relatives and friends were equally grief-stricken, some visibly shaking with emotion. Among them were several gang members, heavily tattooed. One man, Manuel, caught my attention. He had an unusual black and red tattoo on his right cheek. At first, I thought it resembled an apple, but I wasn't entirely sure. As they mourned, I overheard Manuel talking to Carlos's lifeless body. "We're gonna find out who did this," he said, "and you're coming with us for the ride." I don't know much about gang culture, but I understood their intention: revenge, likely another drive-by shooting. When the group finally left, the room felt different, heavy, almost electric. It was as if Carlos's spirit was restless. I spoke softly to him, explaining what I was doing and showing him respect, even though he was no longer alive. It's something all morticians learn: treating the dead with dignity seems to make our work smoother. Strange as it sounds, talking to the deceased feels natural in this line of work. Ask any mortician, and they'll tell you the same. That same night, I stayed late at the funeral home. 2 colleagues were with me. One was out collecting a body, while the other was preparing someone for the next day's service. When the first colleague returned, I glanced at the body he had brought in and froze. It was Manuel. That morning, Manuel had been alive, standing next to Carlos. Now he was here, lifeless. I realized the tattoo I'd seen wasn't a tattoo at all. Manuel had been shot during a revenge drive-by, the bullet entering one cheek and tearing through the other. The mark I noticed earlier mirrored the exit wound he now bore. To this day, I wonder, what had I seen? Was it a vision, a foreshadowing, or something beyond explanation? The only solace was that the mortician handling Manuel did an exceptional job reconstructing his cheek for the viewing. Another story stands out to me. Though my family is Christian, I've always been curious about other cultures and beliefs, especially since becoming a mortician in a diverse city. One case involved a man from the Hmong community, a culture with strict funeral customs. For instance, they don't cremate their dead and insist on removing all metal from the body: pacemakers, jewelry, anything before burial. It's believed that metal can trap the spirit, preventing it from moving on peacefully. This particular man was 46. A Vietnam War veteran exposed to Agent Orange, which weakened his heart over time. He passed away at home. When I arrived to collect his body, tensions in the house were palpable. His brothers and elders were furious, yelling at his wife. She wasn't Hmong and didn't understand their customs, which only escalated the conflict. Their children, caught in the middle, were part Hmong, part Maine. I suggested they call me once things settled down. Later, during my lunch break, I dozed off briefly. In my dream, I received a phone call. A calm voice said, "Brother, someone is being hateful to me and my family. Please help us." I woke up feeling oddly energized and couldn't shake the dream. At 5 p.m., the family called. When I arrived, the house was in disarray, holes in the walls, objects strewn everywhere. The man's wife and daughters were crying. His son handed me a tape, saying it contained his father's final wishes. They had already dressed him in traditional Hmong attire, so I placed him in the van. On the way back, curiosity got the better of me, and I played the tape. The voice matched the one from my dream. In English, the man expressed sadness that his family hadn't visited during his long illness. He also made an unexpected request. He wanted to be cremated, going against Hmong tradition, so he wouldn't be reborn as Hmong in his next life. This explained the anger of his brothers, who saw cremation as a betrayal. Later, as I began embalming him, I found something unusual: a small sewing needle lodged beneath his big toenail. Hmong believe any metal left in the body can trap the soul. Realizing the significance, I carefully removed it. On the day of the funeral, we honored his last wish and cremated him. I hope his family found peace and learned to support one another through loss, as he had wished. Thank you for sticking with me through these stories. Your support means the world. Until next time, stay curious and compassionate. Have a wonderful day or night.